It is just before 11 o'clock at night on the 11th of November, 1940. The Italian battle fleet is asleep. 6 battleships sit at anchor in the harbor of Taranto on the heel of Italy. Around them, heavy cruisers, light cruisers, destroyers, nearly 60 warships in all, searchlights, barrage balloons, over 100 anti-aircraft guns, and nearly 200 machine guns ring the water. It is one of the best defended harbors in the world, and the men aboard those ships believe they are safe. They are wrong, and in the darkness overhead, droning toward them at barely 140 miles an hour, comes the strangest weapon you can imagine to end the age of the battleship. A biplane, made of fabric and wire. A machine that already looks 20 years out of date. By sunrise, half of Italy's battleships will be sitting on the bottom of that harbor, and a young officer in a foreign uniform will be standing on the docks, quietly taking notes. Notes that, 1 year and 1 ocean away, will help set the sky on fire over a place called Pearl Harbor. This is the story of the night that changed naval warfare forever, and almost nobody remembers it. Let's go back a few months, because to understand why this raid mattered so much, you have to understand how desperate Britain had become. It's the autumn of 1940. France has fallen. Nazi Germany rules Western Europe, and Britain, bombed nightly, standing alone, has just lost something else. The French Navy that used to help it control the Mediterranean. Because on the 10th of June, 1940, Italy declared war on Britain, and that changed everything. Suddenly, the Regia Marina, the Italian Royal Navy, had 6 battleships in the Mediterranean and the power to strangle Britain's shipping lanes to Egypt, to Malta, to the whole Middle East. Here's the problem, though. The Italian fleet wouldn't come out and fight. Why would it? It could just sit in its fortress harbor at Taranto, a fleet in being, forcing the British to guard against it everywhere at once. As long as those battleships existed, they controlled the Mediterranean without ever firing a shot. So the British commander in the Mediterranean, Admiral Andrew Cunningham, faced an impossible question. How do you destroy a fleet that refuses to leave port? And the answer he reached for was an idea so old, it was almost forgotten. An idea that had been sitting in a drawer since 1938. If the enemy won't come to you, you fly to them. Now, I want to introduce you to the aircraft that made this possible, because you're not going to believe it. It was called the Fairey Swordfish. Its own crews called it the String Bag. It was a 2-man, open cockpit biplane with a fabric skin, and it looked like something left over from the First World War. Its top speed was about 140 miles an hour, and pilots joked that was going downhill. In an age of sleek, all-metal fighters, this thing was a flying antique. But here's the twist. That very slowness made it strange to kill. Enemy fighters would come screaming in to attack it, and overshoot because they were moving so much faster than the lumbering biplane. And the Swordfish could fly low, painfully, beautifully low, low enough to drop a torpedo with real accuracy. The men who flew it swore they loved it. No aircraft, one test pilot said, could have been more forgiving. So that was the plan. Load these fabric antiques with torpedoes, fly them off a carrier in the dead of night, and throw them at the most heavily defended harbor in the Mediterranean. There was just one enormous problem, and it was the water itself. Taranto's harbor was shallow, only around 40 feet deep, and an airdrop torpedo, when it hits the sea, plunges deep before it levels out to run. In water that shallow, every torpedo would simply bury itself in the mud of the harbor floor. Useless. How do you drop a torpedo into water too shallow to drop a torpedo? The British answer was almost absurdly simple. They tied a wire from the nose of each torpedo up to the aircraft. As the torpedo fell away, the wire held its nose up, so instead of knifing down deep, it belly flopped flat onto the surface and ran shallow. They set those torpedoes to run at just 33 feet. It was a gamble that had never been tested in a real attack. An entire raid depended on it working. The operation had a name, Operation Judgment, and it had already suffered for it. It was supposed to launch weeks earlier, but a fire broke out in a fuel tank aboard the carrier Illustrious and destroyed 2 aircraft. Another carrier, the Eagle, was knocked out of the plan by battle damage, and some of her Swordfish were transferred over. 3 more planes dropped into the sea from engine trouble, caused by bad fuel. So on the night it finally happened, Cunningham didn't have a great armada. He had 1 aircraft carrier, Illustrious, and 21 obsolete biplanes. 21, against a fleet of nearly 60 ships. Now hold that thought, because I want you to picture what those crews were about to fly into. But first, ask yourself, if you were one of those men sitting in an open cockpit in the dark, knowing the odds, would you have climbed in? At 35 minutes past 8 in the evening, the first wave lifted off the deck of the Illustrious 12 Swordfish from a point about 170 miles from the target. Half of them carried torpedoes. The rest carried bombs and parachute flares. Behind the pilot, where the gunner normally sat, was a bulging extra fuel tank because these little planes barely had the range to get there and back. About an hour later, a second wave of 9 began to take off, and immediately things went wrong. 2 aircraft clipped each other on the deck. 1, damaged, had to turn back. So the force that actually attacked Taranto that night was even smaller than planned, and it split in the darkness and thin cloud into scattered little groups, some torpedo planes, some bombers, feeling their way toward one of the most dangerous patches of sky on Earth. And then they arrived over the harbor, and the sky came alive. Imagine it from the cockpit. You are in a fabric biplane, flying low and slow over a fortress harbor. Below you and around you, the entire Italian fleet opens fire at once. Searchlights sweep the water. Anti-aircraft shells burst in walls of flame. Tracer fire, thousands of rounds, rises up to meet you in glowing streams. The defenders fired so much metal into the air that some later said the wonder wasn't how many planes were lost, but how many survived. The flare droppers went first, hanging brilliant white lights in the sky to silhouette the anchored battleships. And then the torpedo planes went down, dropping almost to the surface of the water, threading between barrage balloon cables, aiming for the great steel shapes lit up against the dark. The first wave struck. A torpedo tore into the brand new battleship Littorio. Then another, then a third. The older battleship Connie D. Cavour took a torpedo that opened her hull to the sea. Then the second wave arrived and pressed the attack home through the same storm of fire, and hit the Littorio again and struck the battleship Caio Duilio, blowing a hole at her side. And here is the part that is almost impossible to believe. The entire attack, both waves, was over in about an hour. And when the flares burned out and the last biplane turned for home, 3 Italian battleships were sinking or settling into the mud of their own harbor. 3 battleships, crippled in a single night by 21 fabric biplanes. And the cost to the British? 2 aircraft lost. 2. Almost 700 Italian sailors were casualties. The Littorio and the Caio Duilio would eventually be repaired, but the Connie D. Cavour never truly returned to service before the war passed her by. In the space of a single hour, half of Italy's battleship strength had been knocked out of the war. The Italian fleet pulled back, moving its surviving heavy ships north to Naples, out of what it had thought was a safe stronghold. And the psychological blow went deeper than the physical one. The Regia Marina, one of the largest fleets in the Mediterranean, would never again summon the confidence to challenge the Royal Navy head-on for control of that sea. Admiral Cunningham understood exactly what he had just witnessed. Taranto, he said, in the night of the 11th, 12th of November, 1940, should be remembered forever as having shown once and for all that in the fleet air arm the Navy has its most devastating weapon. He was right. For centuries, the battleship had been the king of the sea. The biggest guns, the thickest armor, the final word in naval power. And in 1 hour, over one harbor, a handful of obsolete biplanes had proven the king could be killed at anchor from the air. But the story doesn't end there, because the whole world was watching, and one nation was watching more closely than anyone. The attack made front page news everywhere, and a United States Navy observer, Lieutenant Commander John Opie, had actually been aboard the Illustrious during the raid. He reported straight back to Washington what he'd seen, including that the Royal Navy now trusted airdrop torpedoes to do what battleship guns could not. American officers even suggested installing torpedo nets at a certain vulnerable Pacific base. But the warnings drifted into memos, and the memos drifted into filing cabinets, and nothing was done. Someone else, though, took very careful notes. In December of 1940, a Japanese naval officer named Takashi Nato, an assistant attaché based in Berlin, traveled to Taranto to study the damage for himself and to speak with Italian officers about exactly how it had been done. In the following year, a larger Japanese naval mission spent days in Italy, then traveled down to see the fleet, asking pointed questions about that one November night. Now, historians debate how direct the line really is. The Japanese had their own plans, their own ambitions, their own genius for carrier aviation. Taranto didn't invent the idea of attacking a fleet in harbor, but it did something crucial. It proved the idea worked. It showed the world that a shallow, defended anchorage was no longer safe, that carrier aircraft could reach in and destroy a battle fleet where it slept. And 13 months later, on the morning of the 7th of December, 1941, on the far side of the world, the aircraft of the Imperial Japanese Navy came out of the sky over a shallow, safe harbor in Hawaii and did to the United States Pacific Fleet, on a far larger scale, exactly what those biplanes had done at Taranto. If there was a thread connecting the two, one historian put it best: it ran through Rome. So think about that the next time someone tells you the future always arrives with a roar. Sometimes it arrives on fabric wings at 140 miles an hour in the dark. 21 antique biplanes flying into a wall of fire, quietly closing the age of the battleship and opening the age of the aircraft carrier that would decide the entire war at sea. The men of the Illustrious flew home that night, not knowing they had just rewritten the rules of naval warfare. They only knew they'd survived, but the lesson they wrote over Taranto in torpedo and flame would be read and copied and paid for in blood on oceans all over the world. That's the night 21 biplanes changed everything. And now you know why it should never be forgotten.